Hello and welcome to today's Masterclass, which is a new Masterclass all about completing ACCA's practical experience requirement with an ACCA Approved Employer. Today's webinar is therefore for those of you who are already working with an approved employer or who may work for an approved employer in the future. We want to support you on your journey towards ACCA membership, and so we're delighted that you can join us today. My name is Heather Murmu and I'm from ACCA's professional development team, and I'm also joined by Dawn McKenna and Jackie McClintock, who are on hand to answer your questions today and will be taking you through today's webinar. Before we begin, I need to cover a few housekeeping items. To get the best experience, please watch this webinar in Google Chrome if possible. And in case of any problems with visuals or sound, try refreshing your browser. Please note that the presentation slides, as well as any of the widgets, can be adjusted to be made larger or smaller according to your preference. There's a selection of useful links and resources available in the resources section of this webinar. And you can use the Ask a Question widget to send us your questions. You can send us your questions at any time throughout the webinar. We'll answer them directly via the Q&A function. And we're also going to answer some questions live at the end. And finally, today's session will be recorded. And after the session has ended, you'll receive a link to allow you to rewatch this webinar at your leisure. And that link will go out to you within the next couple of days. So today, we'll be taking you through an overview of the practical experience requirement, including the time requirement and performance objectives. We'll then give an overview of the approved employer route for PER and the difference between the standard PER route and the approved employer route. We'll cover what your supervisor's responsibilities are for helping you transfer to membership, what you need to complete within the online PER tool if you're working for an approved employer. We'll also look at an example of an approved employer PER confirmation form and how each of the parties complete this, and finally a summary of this journey. So let's get started. As you know, there are three parts to becoming an ACCA member: the exams, the ethics, and the experience. And they're all equally important. Professional ethics is at the heart of the ACCA qualification. It's covered extensively within our exams, our practical experience requirements, and given special attention within the ethics and professional skills module. And today's webinar is about the experience component of the ACCA qualification, which is known as the practical experience requirement, or PER. The practical experience requirement is a really important part of the ACCA qualification because it shows employers that you can apply the knowledge and techniques gained through your studies in the workplace. It's an opportunity for you to gain deeper understanding of what you've learned in your studies towards the ACCA exams as you apply your learning in the workplace. And if you're studying while you work, the real-world learning you gain can help you to succeed in your exams. PER provides you with the breadth and depth of experience needed as a foundation to becoming a professionally qualified accountant. And you'll be supported by a practical experience supervisor, giving you the confidence to succeed in your training and your ongoing career. Furthermore, to complete the PER, you'll need to reflect on the skills and knowledge that you gained through your experience, which is an important practice as you become a lifelong learner. There are two key components to the PER. You need to achieve 36 months of supervised experience in a relevant accounting or finance role, and also demonstrate that you've achieved a set of 9 performance objectives. To do this, a trainee may follow what, for the purposes of this webinar, we'll call the standard PER route, which means you would be working in a supervised relevant role, but not with an ACCA approved employer. And this might also be referred to as the non-approved employer route. Or you may be following the approved employer route, which means you're in a supervised relevant role with an ACCA approved employer for the trainee development stream. So what is an ACCA approved employer? The Approved Employer Programme is an accreditation of an employer's learning and development policies and systems, and it's the trainee development stream that relates specifically to PER. If an organisation has been awarded approved status for trainee development at gold or platinum level, ACCA has assessed that the level of training and support they provide to their trainees is sufficient to meet the PER, and they have suitable learning and development processes in place. If you work for an approved employer holding trainee development approval, you'll still be achieving the same level of experience to complete your PER as trainees who do not work for an approved employer. So you'll still need to complete 36 months of time and achieve a set of 9 performance objectives, but you'll claim your PER in a different and more simplified way to those who follow the standard PER route. It's always at the employer's discretion whether or not you can record your PER in this simplified way. To find out if your employer is approved, usually your HR department or finance manager would be responsible for the accreditation and would be able to confirm this. If they're unable to provide you with this information, then you can check the Approved Employer database, which is available on the ACCA website. And you'll find a link to the database in the related content section of today's webinar. Not all roles at an approved employer will be relevant, and we sometimes find that trainees believe their role is covered when the approval given to their employer only covers particular locations or particular departments, or they find that their employer is actually no longer an approved employer. So it's important that you confirm with your employer that your specific role is covered. And as mentioned earlier, your employer may hold approved employer status for trainee development. However, they might still wish for you to complete your PER via the standard route and not via this simplified route. So it's always best to check this out in advance with your employer. If you'd like to find a role with an approved employer, you'll find that job listings usually specify that an employer is an ACCA approved employer. You can also visit the ACCA careers web pages, where you'll find a range of roles from across the world and from a wide range of sectors. Again, you'll find a link to these pages in the related content section. An employer must be approved for the trainee development stream for you to be able to follow the approved employer route for your PER. Some employers are approved for the professional development stream only, which relates to continuing professional development, which applies only when you become a member and means you can follow the approved employer route for your CPD, but it's not applicable to PER. And remember, you don't have to work for an approved employer to achieve your PER. It would just mean that you follow the standard route for your PER instead of the approved employer route. As we've mentioned, if you are working for an approved employer, you still need to complete the 36-month time requirement, which is the same as for the standard route. We know that circumstances change, and you might not work for the same employer for all of those 36 months. And so the 36 months can be achieved in one role, or in more than one role with an approved employer, or with more than one approved employer. It can also be achieved partly with an approved employer and partly via the standard route. if you also work for an employer who's not an approved employer for some of your PER. And of course, your circumstances may completely change, and you might work for an employer who isn't approved for the whole 36 months, and this is absolutely fine, as you would instead follow the standard PER route. I'll now hand you over to Dawn, who's going to talk about performance objectives. Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you very much, Heather, and thank you to everyone who has been joining us today and who has been asking questions. As Heather has been presenting, Jackie and I have been answering those. So, as Heather mentioned, we are now going to move on and look at the performance objectives. You need to achieve 9 of these in total, and this is the same requirement whether you are following the standard route for your PER or you are working for an approved employer. Objectives are how you demonstrate your effective performance in the workplace. The performance objectives set the minimum standard of work that you are expected to achieve and demonstrate, and they describe the kinds of work activities you may carry out. They also highlight the values and attitudes that you are expected to possess and demonstrate as a trainee accountant. If you have ever taken part in an appraisal process at work, you may find the performance objectives are similar to the objectives and expectations set by your manager. Objectives and the exams are closely linked, meaning that the knowledge and techniques you developed through your studies is applied to the workplace. And the tasks and activities you will be asked to demonstrate are also closely related to the type of work that you will undertake on a regular basis in an accounting or finance role. You will need to complete 9 performance objectives in total, made up of 5 essentials and 4 technical objectives. These are the essentials. They place emphasis on professionalism and ethics, stakeholder relationship management, strategy, innovation and sustainability, governance and leadership. These are fundamental, essential business skills that all accountants require, so every ACCA trainee needs to achieve all 5 of these objectives. There are 17 technical performance objectives to choose from, and they fall into 7 different technical areas that range from corporate reporting to audit and assurance and data, digital and technology, and you can see these on screen. You will need to complete any 4 from the 17 performance objectives, and you can complete these objectives in any order. If you choose an objective from one technical area, you do not have to complete all of the others related to that subject. If you are following a specific program with an approved employer, there may be particular performance objectives that you will work towards to meet the program requirements. So you should work with your supervisor to confirm which performance objectives you will be able to achieve. We recommend that you choose the technical objectives that best align to your roles, because you should find it much easier to achieve the performance objectives that link most closely to your everyday work. We also find that trainees are sometimes drawn towards the tax or audit objectives, so we also advise that you should only choose those objectives if you are working in a specific audit or tax role. This is because the level of experience you need to achieve these means that you will need to have worked on audits on a tax environment on a regular basis. So if working on audits or tax is not a regular part of your role, it would be better to choose other technical objectives that better match the work that you do on a regular basis. You can see here the structure of a performance objective. Each performance objective is made up of a description, which is a summary of the performance objective, and 5 elements labelled A to E, which outline the specific tasks and behaviours that you must demonstrate to achieve the performance objective. To claim an objective, you must demonstrate carrying out the work activities that relate to the performance objective to a consistent standard in the workplace. For full details of all of the performance objectives, including descriptions, elements, and example activities, we provide a performance objective booklet called Achieve. The Achieve booklet can be found on our website, and you can also download it from the resources section of this webinar, as Heather mentioned earlier. Now, we're going to take a look at the role of practical experience supervisors within an approved employer. So what does a practical experience supervisor do? Well, supervisors should support you by helping identify which performance objectives you should target, and maybe setting a target date which you should achieve them by. They help to plan out the experience that you need to achieve the performance objectives that you're targeting. This may mean helping to arrange job rotations, project work, or maybe a secondment so you can get a range of experience. They should work with you to see if you need any personal development to achieve the level of workplace performance needed to complete the objectives. This could be training, research, or additional coaching to help you do this. Your progress towards achieving your PER should be regularly evaluated, and a practical experience supervisor is the person who will sign off on your approved employer PER confirmation form once they believe you have met the required standard. While not required within the PER recording tool, your supervisor may ask you to provide performance objective statements or your line manager so that they can review them within your appraisal or one-to-one. But what should you write in your statement? You should look to summarise the experience you have gained to meet the objective, and we can break this into 3 useful steps for you to follow. Firstly, explain what you did. So give an example of a task that you've worked on. Secondly, describe the skills you gained, which helped you achieve the objective. And lastly, reflect on what you learned, what went well, or what you would do differently. You can find guidance on how to write a performance objective statement on the website and in the resources section today. If you follow the approved employer route, you will still need to use the recording tool to record your employment information. Within the recording tool, you will notify ACCA that you are working for an approved employer and that you are planning to claim your objectives via this route. You will add this information when recording your employment details. When you leave your employer or when you are applying for membership, you'll then submit a PER confirmation form, which will verify your time with the employer and if you have achieved any performance objectives. You can access the form in the recording tool when you add an end date or when you have achieved 36 months of experience. You can also find a copy of the form on the website and in the online application for membership. We have also included a copy in the related content section of the webinar. However, please note that this form may get updated by the time you submit this to ACCA, so you should make sure to get hold of a recent copy when you're ready to submit the form to us. We are now going to look at how you record your employment in the recording tool. As mentioned earlier, you must record your employment details in the online recording tool, which you can access through your My ACCA account. Your dashboard will look similar to what we have shown on screen. This dashboard shows your most recent employment information and the amount of time that you have accrued towards your 36-month total across all of your recorded employment roles. You can go to the Employment tab or click on the View Employment button to go to the employment screen. Within the employment screen, you would then click on Add New Employer, as highlighted with the red arrow. You would then fill in your employer details and click on Save and Finish at the bottom. You will now need to add your role details. So to do this, you would click on the third box, which is highlighted just now, which says Add New Role. This is the screen where you will add your role information. In addition to your job title and start date, you're also asked to confirm the average hours you work per week and the percentage relevance of your role, again highlighted on screen. The recording tool takes all of your role information and automatically calculates how much time you can gain in your role, so you do not have to calculate it manually. If you are currently in a role, you should leave the end date blank, and your time will continue to accrue each month until you update this. You will also highlight that your employer was an ACCA Approved Employer, as well as if you are working in an audit role or if your role included lecturing. There are help icons next to each field to give you extra information to help you record your details accurately. Once you highlight your employer as being an approved employer, you will be presented with the orange Approved Employer Form box. You will download the Approved Employer PER confirmation form to be completed by yourself and your employer. The form will then need to be submitted to our members team, who will review and action this accordingly. All of the information a supervisor needs to provide will be on this form. Therefore, your supervisor does not need to register online or use the PER recording tool. If your role is not highlighted as being with an approved employer, this box will not appear, and you should follow the process of registering a supervisor and submitting your PER to them for sign-off, which is covered in our alternative webinars that cover the standard non-approved employer PER process in detail. So once you have reached 36 months or you are leaving your approved employer, you will need to download the PER confirmation form for it to be completed and sent to ACCA. On screen just now is an extract of the form. The full form has guidance and instructions on the first page. However, for the benefit of this presentation, we've pulled out a few important sections to highlight. As a trainee, you will fill in Section 1. It asks you to detail your information as well as that of your employer. If you do not know the approved employer number of your employer, this is okay, as ACCA have records of these internally and can complete this information based on the accurate name and address of the employer. You also need to complete your employment dates, as well as how many months of experience you have gained. If you are working full-time, this should be simple. However, if you are working in a part-time role, please ensure that you pro-rata the number of months that you have achieved accordingly. ACCA equates that 1,540 hours of experience is equal to 12 months of PER experience. Here are two sections that your supervisors are required to complete. Most trainees will only have one supervisor within an organisation, and within an approved employer, this is usually a line manager. Therefore, your line manager will normally complete the section which is first on the form, the left-hand screenshot on this slide. If your company's policy is to have two supervisors approve the form, such as a line manager and then the department head, there is an additional section for the second supervisor to record their details. Both supervisors are required to supply the same details, such as their name, qualifications, and their relationship to you. These, as well as the signatures in this section, are very important, as this is where we verify who has signed off the objectives and the declaration in the subsequent pages. If we are unable to match these signatures to the performance objectives marked as achieved or to the overall form, ACCA would not be able to process this, and it would need to be recompleted by both you and your supervisor. Please also make sure that all signatures on the form are either handwritten or are official, verified digital signatures. We are unable to accept typed signatures or a font that looks like a signature on our forms. This must be handwritten or an official digital signature. And remember, not every organisation will have two supervisors signing off the form. Therefore, if this is not the procedure in your own organisation or company, this is not a problem. Your supervisor will sign off your performance objectives within this section of the form. At the top is an example of the objectives that the supervisors will be verifying. Again, the actual form has instructions and guidance. These screenshots are just to highlight the different sections to you today. As you already know, you're required to complete all 5 of the essential objectives and 4 of the technical objectives, and this is where your supervisor will verify if you have met these. As you can see in the example, once your supervisor is satisfied that you have met the requirements of a performance objective, they will need to provide their signature and the date of the sign-off next to each one. Please remember though, that if your supervisor does not believe you have achieved the objective, even if you have exceeded the 36-month time requirement, they may ask you to do some more work towards meeting one or more of the objectives before they are confident in signing off the form. In the bottom screenshot, this is the final sign-off for the full form. You will see that this person is then responsible for confirming that all of the employment information provided is correct, that your months of experience in a relevant role is correct, that you have followed your organisation's performance management and appraisal process, and that overall you are eligible to claim their performance objectives via this route. Once this form has been fully completed and signed off, it should then be sent to ACCA. Even if you're not applying for membership at this time, it is best to have it submitted if it is fully completed. When this is received by us, any objectives marked as achieved and signed off as well as any time claim confirmed, will be added to your PER recording tool and will be reflected on your My ACCA dashboard. If your employer is part of our exchange program, then these forms can be sent to the Business Relations team. You can complete all of your experience with an approved employer, or you may leave before completing everything. If that's the case, we can update your experience to date based on what you submit on the confirmation form, and then you can complete whatever is remaining with your new employer. This way, your progress is accurately reflected across all ACCA systems and you know exactly what is left to complete. Remember, a supervisor can only sign off experience that you have completed with them, and therefore not any experience that you have gained with a previous employer. As mentioned earlier, I strongly advise that you have all of your forms completed and submitted to ACCA as close to your employment ending or changing as soon as possible. This way, you can keep track of what experience you have achieved and still need to achieve, and then you should encounter very few difficulties in having this verified by your supervisors. So today we have looked at an overview of PER, an overview of the specific approved employer route, PER supervisors, how to use the PER recording tool if you work for an approved employer, and how to complete the approved employer PER confirmation form. We have some time to go through some questions that have been received today, so I'll now hand you back over to Heather for our Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dawn. And thank you everybody for sending your questions in today. So we have had a couple of common themes in our questions, and one of the first ones is, can you start PER while studying, whether you're studying for ACCA exams or whether you're in college studying for a different qualification? And the answer to that is yes. You don't have to wait until you've completed the ACCA exams to start your PER, and you don't have to wait until you're working full time. So as long as you're working in a relevant and supervised role, then it will count towards your PER, and this includes part-time work, as well as voluntary work and work placements and internships if you're taking on one of those as well. So as long as you're in a supervised relevant role, then this will be able to count towards your PER, and we recommend getting started with your PER as soon as possible. We know that often exams will be your main focus. However, if you do have time to familiarise yourself with the recording tool and get started on recording your experience, it all helps, rather than leaving it until you want to actually submit your experience to be signed off and accepted. So yeah, definitely recommend getting started as soon as possible. Another question that we've had is, what if I've left an approved employer and I didn't get all of my experience signed off before I left? So the approved employer can retrospectively complete a PER form and sign off the objectives that you achieved during that time. And we recommend getting any PER you've achieved signed off before you leave an employer to avoid being in this situation. What can also happen is you might leave an employer and you want to go back and get your form signed off. However, the people who actually supervised you at the time might have moved on to a new employer, in which case you wouldn't be able to get that experience signed off. So we always recommend get your experience signed off, whether it's with an approved employer or not, as soon as you can before you leave the employer. Similarly, what if my supervisor at my approved employer left and moved on to a new company? So in this case, you need to have a different supervisor within your employer. If you're with an approved employer, needs to be a different supervisor within your approved employer sign off that PER, because whoever signs off the PER confirmation form must currently work at the approved employer. Another theme I can see coming through, again, about moving to a different employer. What if I move employer, but to a company that isn't an approved employer? You can, as we said in the webinar, you can achieve part of your experience with an approved employer and part of your experience with a non-approved employer. You would submit your PER confirmation form for your time with the approved employer, and then follow the standard PER route where you're recording your experience all within the recording tool and getting that signed off by supervisors within the recording tool. And we have separate webinars and guidance that would be able to help you with that process as well. And finally, where can you get hold of the PER confirmation form? Well, it's available on our website. It's in the recording tool. When you add that your role is with an approved employer, you'll be able to see the PER confirmation form. And you can also download it today from the resources section of today's webinar. I think that's all of the questions that we've had in that would be useful to share with the group today. So thank you very much for joining us for today's session. We hope it has been helpful for you, and we wish you all the best on your journey to ACCA membership.